At the start of the movie, we meet Nancy, a young woman who's just discovered she's pregnant. Sitting with her best friend Tabitha, Nancy nervously admits that the test came back positive. When Tabitha asks who the father is, Nancy hesitates, then quietly confesses she doesn't know. She's been seeing multiple men recently, and it's impossible to be certain. Nancy works at a small local restaurant, so after the shocking news, she quickly heads to her shift. While driving, lost in her thoughts and music, her car suddenly breaks down on a deserted roadside. With no other choice, she starts walking. That's when she bumps into Bobby, her cheerful co-worker, who rides his bike to work every day. To avoid being late, Nancy hops on the back, and together they race toward the restaurant. Once they arrive, Nancy heads straight to the owner's office. But here's the twist. The owner isn't just her boss, he's her father. Recently promoted to restaurant manager, Nancy's father wastes no time reminding her that with a new title comes new responsibilities. Her co-workers now look up to her, and it's time she acts like a leader. He also mentions he has a date later that evening, his first since Nancy's mother passed away years ago. Since he'll be out late, he asks Nancy to stay behind and handle the closing shift. Later that night, while cleaning up, Nancy notices leftover food on a customer's plate. Suddenly, she feels dizzy and rushes to the back, throwing up. Jake, the restaurant's head chef and her father's trusted right-hand man, happens to see her and grows suspicious. Could she be pregnant? When her father returns and sees Nancy sick, Jake quickly covers for her, claiming it's from spoiled meat. Her father buys it and leaves again, none the wiser. Now alone in charge, Nancy tries to keep things running smoothly. But when Peter, a kind-hearted yet mentally challenged employee, accidentally spills water on the floor, Nancy stays calm and tells him it's okay. Moments later, however, a group of local teenage troublemakers ride up on their bikes. They're not there to eat. They're there to stir up chaos. Trying to avoid a scene, Nancy steps outside to deal with them. But her pregnancy hormones and exhaustion push her patience to the limit. She snaps, yelling at her staff and scolding Peter for being too slow. Things spiral when the teens return, this time wearing masks. Pretending to order food, they taunt Nancy until she finally loses control, shouting at them to leave or she'll call the police. One of them laughs and says, "We'll be back in 10 minutes. Now furious and feeling unsupported, Nancy lashes out at everyone, Bobby, Peter, even Jake. Jake tries to calm her down, saying the kids were just messing around, but Nancy refuses to listen. In a moment of anger, she fires Jake on the spot. Everyone freezes. Jake is stunned. He's been the restaurant's head chef for years and her father's most trusted employee. Still, Nancy doesn't back down. She insists he leave immediately. Jake pleads, explaining he needs the job to pay his bills and for his medication, but she won't budge. After Jake walks out, Nancy tries to pull herself together. Bobby gently checks on her, but she snaps at him too, telling him not to pretend he cares. Later, she calls her father to inform him that she fired Jake. Furious, he scolds her for making such an impulsive decision. Sure, she can handle the menu on her own for now, but Jake was irreplaceable. With the restaurant already struggling financially, mistakes like this could destroy them. Still, Nancy refuses to close early. The bills are piling up, and she needs every dollar she can make. So, she decides to stay open through the night, completely alone in the empty restaurant, trying to shake off the weight of everything she's just done. Nancy tries to shake off the tension. She plays music, cleans up, and even dances around the empty restaurant, flicking on the disco lights for fun. But then, something catches her eye. Across the street, under the dim glow of the streetlights, she sees the teenagers' bicycles. They're back. Panicked, Nancy grabs the loudspeaker, warning them that she's calling the police. But instead of retreating, the masked teens laugh and begin pounding on the restaurant windows harder and harder. Nancy, terrified, finally calls the police. Relief seems imminent until she hears the response. All units are tied up with a murder case, and it could take time for them to send help. Only one officer will be dispatched, just one. With no other choice, Nancy braces herself to hold out alone. She watches as the masked teenagers circle the restaurant like predators. Then the terror begins. Hiding in the kitchen and searching for her phone, Nancy suddenly hears sirens. A police officer has arrived. Relief washes over her. The officer steps out, surveying the area, and reports back to headquarters that everything seems under control. Nancy rushes to describe the masked teenagers on mopeds. But as he listens, the officer's face changes. Those same kids? They were the suspects in the grisly murder case he'd just left. Nancy feels a chill run down her spine. Before he can warn her further, a masked teenager bursts in and brutally kills the officer. Nancy barely has time to react. She runs to the storage room, hiding, her heart pounding. That's when Bobby appears. Without thinking, Nancy pulls him into the kitchen, both of them trying to stay out of sight. But it's too late. The teenagers find them. They are tied up, forced to face each other, while the attackers toy with them, even forcing them to kiss for their twisted amusement. Nancy struggles, refusing to give in. Furious, the masked figures drag her toward the back of the restaurant, but she won't give up easily. In a desperate move, she breaks free, grabs a knife, and slashes one of the attackers. Clutching the blade, she bolts out of the restaurant. One of the teenagers chases her on a moped. Moving backward, Nancy grips the knife tightly, but in the chaos, she accidentally stabs Peter. Shock paralyzes her. What has she just done? Before she can process it, the horrifying truth comes to light. Jake, Bobby, and Bobby's brother Jackson were behind it all. To understand how this nightmare unfolded, we need to rewind to that afternoon when Nancy fired Jake. Jake was a drug addict. He didn't need the job to survive. He needed it to fund his addiction. Peter, his younger brother, was always forced to obey him. That afternoon, Jake and Peter went to buy drugs. Out of money, Jake begged for credit, brandishing a gun he kept in his glove box. On their way back, high and unstable, Jake spotted a group of masked teenagers having a roadside bonfire. In his distorted mind, he blamed them. If the teens hadn't come to the restaurant earlier that day, Nancy wouldn't have gotten angry, and he wouldn't have lost his job. Rage overtook him. Without hesitation, he stabbed one of the teenagers and opened fire, killing the rest in a brutal frenzy. Peter, innocent and unwilling, was forced to go along with it. The nightmare didn't end there. After killing the teenagers, Jake and Peter loaded the mopeds and masks into their car. Jake then went to Bobby and Jackson's house. Furious over Nancy's behavior earlier that day, fueled by anger, he came up with a plan to terrorize her, disguising themselves with masks and mopeds. Bobby and Jackson, always eager for chaos, immediately agreed. Meanwhile, Peter had already arrived at the restaurant. Panicked when he noticed his hands still covered in blood, he rushed to the back to scrub them clean, at the same water tap that the police officer had spotted earlier. Soon after, Jake, Bobby, and Jackson arrived at the restaurant, beginning their reign of terror. They banged on the windows, lurked in the shadows, and did everything possible to scare Nancy. As we saw earlier, their plan initially worked. Then the police officer arrived, causing the group to scatter and hide. Nancy and the officer began discussing the murder case, but Jake, fearing exposure, crept up from behind and struck the officer down. That was the moment Nancy ran and hid in the storage room, terrified. Bobby, watching everything unfold, began to feel guilty. Unlike the others, he hadn't expected things to escalate this far. In a split-second decision, he removed his mask and pretended he had just arrived to help Nancy. But by then, everything was already spiraling out of control. Tragedy struck when Nancy, in the heat of fear and panic, accidentally stabbed Peter. Poor Peter was never meant to be part of this. He was dragged into the nightmare because of his selfish brother, Jake. Still, Nancy wasn't entirely blameless. If she hadn't fired Jake so recklessly, perhaps none of this would have happened. As Peter bled, Jake ordered Jackson to watch over Nancy, while he and Bobby carried Peter inside to treat his wounds. But Jackson let his guard down for a moment, giving Nancy a chance to bolt toward the back of the restaurant. She tripped over a bag of rotten meat, and an idea struck her. Meanwhile, inside, Jake desperately tried to stop Peter's bleeding. Bobby, now fully realizing how out of control things had become, discreetly grabbed the police officer's car keys, needing a way out. At the same time, Nancy's father, still on his date, kept calling Jake to discuss the firing. He had never actually intended to let Jake go. He just wanted to talk things over. But it was already too late. Jake had gone too far, and his phone remained unanswered in the car. Nancy found herself in a tense chase with Jackson. Narrowly avoiding his attacks, she threw hot oil at him to force him back, before ultimately being forced to take his life in order to survive. Breathing heavily, she hid under a table, eyes scanning the blood-soaked floor. That's when she saw Bobby, lying motionless, covered in blood. He had fought Jake, but clearly lost. At that moment, Tabitha arrived, responding to Nancy's earlier call. But the sight of the carnage inside the restaurant made her panic. She fled, leaving Nancy to fend for herself. Ignoring Tabitha's escape, Jake focused on Nancy, who had bolted toward the storage room. The sun was beginning to rise as Nancy made a desperate attempt to escape. But Jake was faster. He caught her, stabbing her from behind, and dragged her back into the restaurant. Unaware she was pregnant, he plunged the knife into her stomach, assuming she was dead. He was wrong. Nancy slowly opened her eyes. The rotten meat she had wrapped around her stomach earlier had absorbed most of the impact, preventing a fatal wound. Struggling to her feet, she glanced at Bobby, barely clinging to life. And in that moment, she admitted the truth. The baby she was carrying was his, the result of a drunken night at a party. With no time to lose, Nancy grabbed the police car keys and made her way to Jake's house. She caught him off guard, attacking him from behind and putting an end to his reign of terror once and for all. Weak from blood loss, she stumbled back to the restaurant. Moments later, her father arrived, taking in the horrifying scene. His voice trembled as he asked what had happened. The film closes with a clear message. Decisions made in anger often lead to disaster. A true leader must remain calm, never acting impulsively just to assert control. Never make decisions when angry. Never make promises when overly happy. Patience, wisdom, and restraint are the keys to avoiding catastrophe. Sometimes, revenge doesn't bring peace. It just opens the door to another nightmare. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because more dark tales are coming your way.